Okay, thank you. We're going to begin now. Today's panel is part of a larger set of activities promoted by the UCI's Year of Scholarly Values work group that was initiated by the Chancellor and chaired by distinguished Professor Duncan Pritchard. This effort aims to engage the campus community in discussions about the role that scholarly values can play in supporting our work as educators and students, as well as the life of our institution. Our session today is designed to highlight how community engagement at UCI can be understood as a set of activities that both reflects and can shape our scholarly values. Through the conversation we're about to have with faculty leading diverse community engagement efforts, the goal is to surface themes, commentary, and questions about what can unite us as a university, what we stand for, and how we can strengthen our role in public life, especially at this time when trust in higher education is under strain. Today, we will be talking about practices growing out of specific programs that might reveal and inform our sense of shared values. Often people think of values as a type of lodestar that drives individual and institutional behaviors. But my fellow co-moderator Val Jenness and I, drawing on the work of sociologist Ann Swidler, would like to suggest that the relationship between values and action can also work in the opposite direction. While values can motivate actions, our actions can also serve as catalysts that function to develop our beliefs, commitments, and values. Before I turn it over to my co-moderator, Val Jenness, I would like to thank our leader of this campus-wide initiative, distinguished Professor Duncan Pritchard, for all the work he's done this year to enable us as a campus community to think about our virtues and our values during this tumultuous period for higher education. Val?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Really great to be here, and I want to welcome everybody. I want to say right up front, it's always a pleasure to be working with Richard. If you haven't done that, you should try to do that and enjoy that. And I welcome the opportunity to talk with you, Richard, and the colleagues and the participants across campus about the projects we'll hear about in a few minutes. And equally importantly, the values they implicate. As we have this conversation, questions will emerge. And for example, we'll talk a little bit about what values animate the work being done at UCI. And looking across and beyond the specific projects the speakers here today will be discussing, we might ask, do we have shared values that bind us together as a community? Related, does it matter whether we have shared values or not? And I would ask, who is the we in all of this? Assuming it's true that our actions can shape our values, as Richard just described, what values might emerge from the activity of the programs being talked about today and other engagement activities across the larger campus? From my point of view, it's important that we continue to talk about the values that are key to our larger community. Lots hangs in the balance of answers to the questions I've just raised and others that I'm sure will emerge, especially, as Richard mentioned, when public trust in higher education is in decline. And here I would like to add, there's also a decline in public investment in higher education. Our incoming president of the University of California, J.B. Milliken, I have it on good authority, he likes to go by J.B., emphasized these pressure points when, after being announced as the incoming president of the University of California, he observed, and I'm quoting, "We are facing unprecedented times in higher education for many reasons. And I think we all recognize what they are in terms of funding from the federal government, in terms of perceptions and attitudes of the public. We need to do everything we can to right the ship." This observation, it seems to me, is an invitation to think about our individual and our collective values and practices. For me, this means doubling down on two things. First, embracing reflection on and interrogation of our core values. And second, enhancing our ability to effectively communicate the value of our values and the beneficial collateral consequences of the practices associated with those values. With this in mind, it really is a pleasure to introduce our speakers, each of whom will have about 8 minutes to share with us the program they direct and the implications for values associated with that program. Also, we've asked our panelists to consider addressing any tensions or challenges experienced in aligning university and community values. After the brief presentations, Richard and I will moderate the Q&A. I'm going to introduce the speakers in order, and we'll begin with Keramet Reiter, Professor of Criminology, Law, and Society. She's the director of UCI's Lifted, and Lifted stands for Leveraging Inspiring Futures Through Educational Degrees, and it is the first in-prison BA program completion, that is, you can earn a BA in the University of California system. Keramet?
Thanks so much, Val. And I'm the only delinquent without PowerPoint, so I'm glad I get to go first. It's really an honor to be here today. I'm going to talk just briefly about Lifted a bit more. Val gave a great introduction. And then I'm going to talk a bit about what I see as some of the benefits and associated motivations, kind of individually and then more broadly, institutionally and community-wise. So just in terms of Lifted, Val gave us a beautiful, succinct introduction, but I am, as Val said, the co-founder with Val, importantly, and Richard has also been very involved, of Lifted. And we were founded in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. We admitted our first cohort of students in 2022, and we graduated our first cohort last summer in 2024. We had 23 amazing students graduate from inside the prison. And just as a bit of background, this is kind of the crash course in exactly what we do. Students apply to UC Irvine from within a prison in San Diego. It's called Richard J. Donovan. It's right on the border with Mexico, about an hour and a half, 2 hours from our campus. So students apply from within prison as junior level transfer students to UC Irvine, and they're applying in the open transfer pool. So they're getting admitted just like any other transfer student meeting the qualifications. And then they earn a bachelor's in sociology. And as of this year, they now have an option to earn a minor in English. So that's kind of the degree pathway they're on. And that means that they are basically being assigned classes, right? We're talking about a small cohort of students. They take a full course load of 4 classes a quarter. And those classes are offered in person by UC Irvine faculty. So folks they make that drive down to the prison in San Diego once a week, and they teach seminar style to 25 to 30 students. That's our cohort size, in a 3-hour block. And one thing we say is we strive to treat our students as similarly as possible as any other campus student. We try to bring in guest lectures. We run an honors program for them. We offer writing center and disability services, just as examples of all the kind of campus resources we try to bring to them. And just as a bit of background, the program builds on state investments in California in public higher education in prison. So in 2013, our legislature funded community colleges to start offering courses in prison. And that was truly successful. Within a few years, all 34 of our state prisons had community colleges on site, most face-to-face, offering courses. And that means that there are now more than 10,000 students in this state with associate's degrees, right? So there's a huge need for these 4-year degree programs like UC Irvine has invested in. When Lifted was founded in 2020, we were only the second bachelor's program for incarcerated students in the state. The first was founded by a Cal State at Lancaster, a prison in northern LA County. There are now 9 bachelor's programs in the state, so this has been growing really rapidly. 7 are run by Cal States, 2 by UCs. So UC Riverside launched a Lifted program this year at a prison near them. So we're really growing, and that is the vision of this program, right? Is that it's not just these 25, 30 students a year we serve at UC Irvine. The idea is that this is a replicable model, that we can serve students across the state by working with community college partners to admit junior level transfers at a, hopefully over time, maybe a dozen prisons statewide with multiple UC campuses. So we're in conversation. We now have UC San Diego faculty teaching with us at Donovan in the UCI Lifted program. We're in conversation with folks at Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, Berkeley about interest in developing more of these programs. So that's uplifted, right? Like, what is it? How does it work? Kind of trying to answer some of the questions that I get about this program. But I think the really interesting question for our conversation today is, beyond the fact that we're educators and we're educating a new group of at-need students, what work is this program doing on, for the folks who participate in it and on the campus and beyond. So, people often talk about this at the very individual level at first, right? Is that this program has benefits for the faculty and the students, right? So if we think about our values and our motivation as being extending educational opportunities, our students do incredibly well. So in our first graduating class, we had 9 students with Latin honors. I think looks like we're on track for 5 or 6 in our second graduating class this year. It's a much smaller class this year, just kind of figuring out streamlining the pipelines. So the rate of honors is still really high. So we have amazing students, right? They're winning campus awards. They're graduating within 2 years with really high grades. And it turns out we also have amazing faculty teaching in this program. So everyone who's taught in the program has asked to come back. One of our co-founders, Carol Cerrone, did interviews last summer with everybody who taught in our first 2 years. And every single person said it was one of their favorite teaching experiences ever. So that's a pretty powerful, I think, both potential benefit, but also motivation that I think the program is doing work to inspire and re-inspire our faculty to engage in education. I hear often that people kind of are reminded in these small classrooms where incidentally the students don't have access to the internet, that they're reminded of why they became educators in the first place and kind of reinvigorated to come back to our campus. But I think, and anytime you hear about prison education programs, you'll hear this if you're not familiar with this, right? The students are great and faculty love it. But I think some of the really important work that's happening at UC Irvine is that we are building a public higher education program in prison. So that is really different from anything that's happened in the kinds of documentaries or profiles you see, where often a small liberal arts college goes into a prison and they serve a few students a year. But UC Irvine has invested in trying to serve all the students that are eligible, right? Really saying how many students need this and how can we work towards building a program that makes this opportunity available on a much larger scale to any student who's a resident of California who's meeting the eligibility requirements to transfer. And within that context, I think we're doing really important work, not just for these students, but on an institutional level to relate to the state prison system, right? So I often say we've got 2 of the biggest state institutions, the University of California and the state prison system, negotiating a partnership together and navigating. And I think that's really important for both institutions, right? We are opening up prisons that are traditionally kind of out of sight, out of mind, often not particularly transparent. We've got now dozens of faculty a year going in, many of them for the first time to see these facilities. And we've got students coming out. Our students are getting released, coming to campus, matriculating. We've had 2 students with life sentences who had their sentences commuted or shortened by the governor, in part because of their participation in the program, and many more with appeals pending. So I often think of this work as really shifting the boundaries of prison and university, right? And blurring them in new ways and taking money that in many cases was taken from the university system to support our really expensive and really often unsuccessful prison system and putting it back into the universities, right? We have state funding to support this program. And I think that's some of the really important work, is that looking at these institutions and seeing how we can make our public institutions serve people in the best possible way. And I think we know that education works better than incarceration in many ways, and we're kind of building into that investment. So that's, kind of thinking about this program more institutionally. And then the last bracketed set of things I want to talk about is just the way that this work has really reshaped my values and perspective of how the university operates in the community, and how I see our university's role. And I think that's been surprising to me. I've been doing prison education work for more than 20 years, and even so doing this work from a major public university as part of a statewide initiative has really changed the way I think about all these institutions. So one thing that's been one of the most beautiful parts of this work for me is the way it's changed, the way I see UC Irvine and the way I see my colleagues. So I'm now in conversation with folks across this campus in a way I never was, right? Every single day I get out of my office and my small school and talk to people in engineering, in computer science, in English, in the School of Pharmacy, in dance. I had lunch with someone from the English department today, right? I have a friend in philosophy now. And that has really, you know, I see this as this alive intellectual community that I think a big research university, we often get kind of siloed a bit. And I see the faculty in the program experiencing that too. And it reminds me of the value of not just my individual research projects, but the kinds of conversations we cultivated at community. And you know, I often feel like I'm a freshman in college again doing the work in this program where like I'm surrounded by all these people with all these amazing expertise who want to share it with me and other students I'm working with. And it's a really cool experience. And I think other people experience that. And it's nice to be reminded of that intellectual work of the university. And the second thing I want to say about kind of reshaping values is that this is such a small initiative in some ways, right? Right now, we're serving just under 50 students. We hope to grow that. We hope within the next few years to be serving closer to 100 students every 2 years. But it's a small number of folks. And yet it feels like it's really has this power to remind us all of why we're doing the work we're doing. So Carol Cerrone, one of our co-founders, often says that, you know, part of the mission of the UCs is to help anyone from anywhere work their way into this major institution. And I think this program really exemplifies that work. But I also see every day the way this little tiny thing has these collateral consequences around the rest of the state, right? So we work really closely with admissions to help get transfer students admitted to UCI, right? And I understand so much more than I ever wanted to understand about the transfer process. But I'm also now part of statewide committees of higher educators in prison who are thinking about how to work together, community colleges, Cal States, UCs, to make the transfer process work better for our most at-risk students. I never imagined that would be a collateral consequence of this. But again, like this little program that's really exemplifying our values of access is helping us think together in these statewide communities about how to do better from this lens of these individuals that we've gotten to know and care about. And the last thing, and where am I on time? Have I? How have I
You're
done?
over, but let's wrap up. Yeah.
All right, I swear it's my last point. Is that I think in this moment when we're really thinking about what's going to survive from our research institutions, I also feel really inspired by the work that our students are generating to think about how they can become active participants in research. And I think that one thing we may all be looking towards is how to build better community partnerships where the community members are really driving, producing, collaborating with us in research, especially if we have way less funding to do a lot of that ourselves. And I think that we are really seeing that with our students. We're piloting having our students design and support program evaluation work. And that's one of the things that I see as most exciting in this space, right? Is that it's also, I hope, by bringing the university community to a totally new space of this prison is kind of helping us see new ways of doing the work that we do. And I think that's especially important right now. So I look forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Keramet. Appreciate that. Our next speaker is Julia Lupton. Julia is a distinguished professor of English and the co-director of the UCI New Swan Shakespeare Center, which is a specialized research program supported by the Office of Research and closely allied with the School of Humanities and the Claire Trevor School of the Arts. Thank you, Julia, for joining us.
Thank you, Richard and Val, for hosting us, and Duncan for your vision. I know you're there in the webinar, and Keramet and Val for your inspiring work. This is on a different scale, and I hope will be of interest to people. I do have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share my screen. So can you see my slides? Yes, great. Okay, so the Year of Scholarly Values began last fall with a panel that introduced the topic to the campus. And that was just 9 months ago, but in many ways it feels like another world, right? Because since then, both the financial outlook and the social standing of American universities plummeted. The cynical use of anti-Semitism to destroy higher ed is making Jews less, not more safe. And many of us are taking stock of what we think the university is for and what kinds of changes might strengthen our institutions moving forward. I can't address all of that, but I feel like that's the framework under which many of us are laboring. At our first gathering, we were asked to talk about our scholarly values. And I came up with hospitality, trust, and care. And these are certainly the virtues or values that guide my work as a dramaturg for the New Swan Shakespeare Festival. If you walk past the Langston Library just this week, you'll see our beautiful theater being assembled. And Eli Simon, who's our artistic director, calls it a welcome mat for the university. And indeed, each year we greet over 5,000 guests. But hospitality is not just about getting people into the theater. It's about making them feel at home in an environment that might appear challenging or foreign, and to do so without in any way diminishing the authenticity of what we are offering. So I call it to be both new and true. And this is the nightly miracle of good theater. I call it the miracle of the host. We host the public while Shakespeare hosts us. In Catholicism, of course, the miracle of the host refers to the Eucharist, the Word made flesh. At New Swan, the theater is our temple, our space of transformation, where each night we hope that Shakespeare will be reborn when the embodied voices of actors join with the hearts and minds of our audiences. And so the virtue of hospitality involves openness and welcoming, an openness to people, but also to ideas, including ideas that might seem threatening or hostile. Hospitality also requires trust, right? Trust that you won't be murdered in your bed like Duncan in Macbeth, or thrust out of doors like King Lear, or forced to play charades in the great comedy of life. As a scholarly virtue, I think hospitality is very closely tied to humility. And here you see the virtue of humility, listening to truth, listening for truth. And humility here is a posture and attitude of openness. But humility without courage is easily exploited by brutalists of all stripes. So one question for me is, has the university been sufficiently hospitable? When our neighbors visit here, do they understand what we do? The arts and humanities, which I represent, should be welcoming, but often theater feels shouty and off-putting, dare I say elite. And I think we humanists do not always practice the ethics of inclusion that we preach. But if we can produce Shakespeare plays night after night that make visitors feel at home, I really think we should be able to describe our work in ways that resonate beyond our scholarly outputs. And I do think that virtues and values are one way to do that. We were all asked to submit short statements, maxims for the Scholarly Values campaign. And here's what I came up with. Scholarly values begin with you. What is your research question? How did you arrive at this topic, and why do you care? And I think we can extend that outward in our conversations with the public by asking, what virtues and values do I share with people outside the university? I think virtues and values can be icebreakers, right, for deeper conversations about why we do the research that we do and what the goals of a liberal education are. And when I say liberal education, I don't mean liberal in the political sense, but in the traditional sense of the 7 liberal arts, the arts of being free. Free to think, free to imagine, free to create, and also free to argue. Why do you care? So a question for me is, well, how is care a scholarly value? And I recommend this beautiful podcast that was just published this week with Mark Lazenby, who is in our committee. He's the Dean of Nursing, and he talks about scholarly values and healthcare. It's really quite profound. But what about the arts and humanities? In the arts and humanities, we have a special duty to care for the historical and cultural record. The past seems like a solid thing, right? We're standing on it, it supports us. But if no one studies the past, if no one preserves the archives of the past, if only the present is fun and cool and urgent, then we're going to lose our connection with so many resources that might make us stronger and more resilient when we really need those resources. And I would say the tradition of virtues is one of those ancient resources that we really need to renew and preserve. And it's because we want to care for the past that New Swan brings teachers to campus each summer for a day of learning and a night of theater. It's why New Swan partners with the UCI libraries to bring teachers and also students to campus to view UCI's copy of the First Folio and learn about old books. It's why New Swan also brings Shakespeare and theater to local schools, providing lessons and workshops that speak to the needs that teachers express that they want to us. And it's also why we host bilingual productions that celebrate the variegated history of classical drama. I'll just end with this piece by a former student of mine, PhD student Jeffrey Wilson, which just appeared in the Smithsonian Magazine. Businesses have a lot to learn from the impromptu teaming that happens in theater. I think it's a nice example of what Val and Richard began with about how what we do generates and articulates and produces our values. Theater produces the values of collaboration and cooperation and teamwork, and it does so in relationship to audiences as co-creators of meaning. And so I think businesses have a lot to learn from theater, but I think that the university does too. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my esteemed colleagues.
Thank you, Julia. I really appreciate that. Our third and final panelist is Andres Bustamante, who is an associate professor of education and the faculty director of Ocean. Ocean stands for Orange County Educational Advancement Network, which is a network of research practice partnerships between K through 12 schools, nonprofit organizations, and the UCI School of Education. Andres, thanks so much for being a panelist.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here and share in this community. So our in our School of Education, we actually have our founding dean, Richard Arum, who helped create Ocean with my colleague June An. They put their heads together, and the vision was to create kind of a different frame or paradigm on engaging with research that really centers relationships at the end of the day. And so in contrast from a history of what some people call like helicopter research, where a scholar kind of swoops in from the ivory tower and has an interesting question or idea and tries it and then disappears into the night with their data, never to be seen or heard from again. The vision was something else, where you would start with relationships between scholars and experts and the community partners and practitioners who are on the ground doing the work, and really learn about what are the opportunities, what are the strengths, what are the goals, what are the challenges that are happening in these everyday spaces where kids and families and all the people that we want to support are living and learning. And through that relationship building, you emerge projects that not only benefit from the expertise of the folks, of the scholars in the university, and advance our knowledge and our science, but also are really meaningful and relevant and impactful in the daily lives of the folks who are in those schools and community organizations and again, those partnership institutions. And so they started this community in 2018, which was coincidentally the year I got to UCI. So I got to come in right at the beginning of it. And I've been a member since the foundation, and just have learned and grown so much as a scholar in that time. And Ocean, since 2018, has started more than 50 research practice partnerships. We've become a leader in the nation in this form of scholarship, and really a place that other folks are looking to for thought leadership on this kind of scholarship. And we've been supported really generously by funders from foundations and federal and state government. I think we're approaching like $25 million in extramural funding for these research practice partnerships, and really creating a new generation of scholars who are getting excellent training in this model of scholarship. And so really excited and proud to be able to take a leadership role in this community. And I guess to bring this idea to life, I'm going to share one project example from my own lab, where we do a lot of partnership with in the city of Santa Ana, with both with the community organization, a specific one called SALE that I'll share more about, with the city and with the school district. And I do believe that pictures bring things to life. So I'm just going to share a few images that, let's see here, can help me illustrate the kind of work that we're doing. Can y'all see my screen? No?
Yeah, we can see it. I
Yes,
can see
okay,
it.
good. So this project was funded by National Science Foundation, and it's called Playful Learning Landscapes. And the goal is to design everyday spaces, parks, bus stops, grocery stores, laundromats, doctor's office waiting rooms, anywhere where children and families go in their everyday routine, to design those for play and early learning. So I'm a developmental psychologist, and I do research on early childhood education and how to make it fun and playful and joyful, but also in partnership with communities so that the designs represent not only developmental science, but also the local values and culture and history and goals that family has for their kids. And so we partner with SALE, who is the Santa Ana Early Learning Initiative. They are an amazing community, grassroots community-based organization led by mostly mothers, but families in Santa Ana. And you can see a picture of their part of their membership. There are now over 300 local families in this organization, so a very powerful group. And we work together to design and co-create these community space installations. And through families sharing stories and pictures from their childhood or the routines and things that they do with their kids, we surface community values. So things like families wanted to activities that would bring the family together and promote intergenerational learning, this dissemination of knowledge up and down family members. So, you know, obviously kids learning from their aunts and uncles, but also grandparents or parents learning from kids about technology or English language or all types of things. Their families wanted their culture and history represented. They want things that were bright and colorful. And then we also combine that with goals from developmental science about what makes excellent learning situations. So learning that's active, engaging, social, joyful, iterative. And then also we had science learning goals because this was an NSF project. So we wanted kids and families asking questions, making observations, noticing patterns or cause and effect relationships. And I'll show you some of the designs that we've come up with. This is in the Northgate Gonzalez Market, which is a local grocery store chain. Families told us stories about learning from their grandparents about how to find the best avocado or papaya. And what we noticed is that the stories were full of scientific observations. Families were using their senses. They were comparing, contrasting. They're making observations. They're planning ahead. What are you going to do with the avocado? Okay, if we want to make a guacamole tonight, let's get a very soft one. But if you want it to last for a salad for next week, we got to get a really firm one. And so elevating these familial practices and really labeling them as science and scientific. We heard a lot from the families that Santa Ana is very densely populated and very park poor, but has a lot of walls. And so how can we activate the walls as play space? And so we worked with a muralist to create some interactive murals. So this is the Yo Veo or I See mural, and it's kind of got like a Where's Waldo kind of feel to it. There's hidden objects, and the kids have to find the objects and use their spatial words like, oh, the green parrot is above or below or underneath or around or behind. And so they're using a spatial language and their skills of observation. Families told us that in a lot of immigrant families and many from Mexico, and they told us that they used the abacus to learn math when they were growing up as kids. And they were wondering, you know, how come their kids don't use the abacus in school? It's such a hands-on and visual tool. And we said, you know, I can't really answer that one, but we could do an abacus like at the bus stop so you can count things while you wait for the bus. And so this is Wendy Gomez, who's the SALE's director, and her son. at the Abacus bus stop. But again, a way to connect families to their roots and their history, and let them share something with their kids in a way that also connects to math and science learning. This is about measuring your height versus California animals or animals from families' home countries. We have a life-size board game that's like a giant board game where you're the piece and you advance around the board, and there's little STEM activities and cultural games embedded within the board game. We have La Loteria, which is a giant game. It's a very popular cultural game, kind of like it works kind of like bingo. But the beautiful thing about Loteria is that in this community, nobody needs instructions on how to play Loteria. If you tell them Loteria, they know how to play right away. So one of the challenges with all these installations is you can't have a lot of rules or instructions or a pamphlet that you have to read. It's got to be very intuitive. And so it's very easy. You spin the wheel, you get your card, and then there's little math and science learning activities embedded in the games. And so through these community space installations, we're observing the impact on caregiver-child interactions and discourse around STEM, and we know that leads to learning, and that language-rich environment is really important for young children. And I just want to highlight, to do this work, it takes a real coalition of actors from all around, including universities, community organizations, school districts, cities, funders, foundations, local businesses. It really is a collection of people leaning in and everybody contributing their skills and their expertise in ways that they are uniquely situated to do so. And also like a whole team of scientists and doctoral students who, again, are getting training and contributing into this kind of community-based scholarship. And then so as an example, then, what I want to offer as a value is this idea of really believing that people talk about a strength-based approach or an asset-based approach. And I've really had to take that seriously, especially in the last month when we've had 2 large federal grants get canceled, and really think about, okay, we were right in the middle of these big ambitious projects, and now the money's gone, or at least the federal dollars are gone. And so what does this mean? Like, does our work still exist? What does this mean for the students who are doing their dissertation or advancing their scholarship, and the community partners who have contributed, their dreams and their hopes to these projects? And what I came to realize pretty quickly is that while the federal dollars opened certain doors and certain opportunities, that the strength and the power in this work was never from those federal grants. So the human capital, those community members, those educators, those local politicians, the graduate students, our faculty, like, we're still here and we're still passionate and excited about this work. And there are local dollars supporting and driving this work forward. And so I'll give you an example of the kind of, we're trying to switch to a more policy-oriented sustainability approach in this work. And so we've been working with the city manager and the city council in Santa Ana to institutionalize some of these processes about community space and public park amenities, so that every time the city builds a new park or a new bus stop or a new amenity, there's now a process to engage the community organization, SAILI, to gather information and feedback to get input about what those designs could look like and how they could center early education. And as a sort of symbolism of that commitment, last month, the city announced that May is now Early Childhood Month for the city of Santa Ana. So again, like that institutional will, they have resources, and they have, like, you'd be shocked in what a bus stop really costs. And spoiler alert, it doesn't cost very much different than an Abacus bus stop. It's like, it's the intentionality and it's the will. With the school district, we have a bunch of different projects. That this one was more about the city, but a bunch of different projects with the school district. And within the last year, the school district reached out in the context of our long-term partnership and said, hey, we are going to be constructing a new school, and we want to make it a partnership school. And so the school district had raised funds through collecting tax dollars, and they are building a new elementary school. And we are going to brand it and launch it as a UC Irvine partnership school. And so again, they came to us not seeking dollars and resources because they had that, but rather our collaboration and our willingness to engage and to innovate together. And so I think there's a moment and an opportunity, even in this really tough times, to really think about what are the sustainable and impactful ways that we can do our scholarship and who we can engage to support it. Because I think the power is here.
Thank you, Andres. Really appreciate that. I want to thank all of our panelists, Professors Reiter, Lupton, and Bustamante. And I want to share with the audience that these were our top 3 choices. They said yes immediately, and I think everybody can see they came prepared and take this very seriously. And so when I thank you 3, I mean it for all those reasons and the illuminating presentations. Our goal now is to have a meaningful discussion with these presentations on the floor, as well as other ideas that come up. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Richard to start the moderating of the panel and see where this takes us. Thanks,
Yeah.
Richard.
Thanks, Val, and thank you to the panelists for getting us started with such wise comments. I heard a lot about the community being a resource and the importance of relationships. And so, but I'm wondering, on the theme of scholarly values, have you experienced any tension with the community around the values you've brought to the work? Or has there been tension within the university about the values of the work you're doing? So I'm trying to kind of I like us to think about what our values are, but also where are our values supported and where are they in tension? And I think it would be a mistake to assume that just because we come from the university and we're doing this work, it's aligned with shared values of the institution. So what did you want? Keramet, do you want to take that? Julia, then Keramet.
Well, we as Val said, the UCI Shakespeare Center is part of the Office of Research, and that means we're up for review every 5 years as a research unit. And so we submitted our self-study, and we got back like a list of questions from the ad hoc committee, and a lot of it was like, how is this research? Well, it was hard to totally intuit what the stories were behind the questions, but what I heard in the question was like, yeah, you're doing interesting stuff, you're having a good time, but why is this in the Office of Research? Why is this research? And so I think there's always that tension. I've been doing community-based research of one sort or another, not just through New Swan, but through the Center for Educational Partnerships and through the UC Humanities Research Institute for 25 years. And that's always the kind of AP challenge, the scholarly outcomes challenges, and what makes it research. And that may be more of a challenge in my field than in some other fields, but I would say that's a tension internal to the university, and it relates to the academic personnel process and just how we assess.
Well, Julia, you have to tell us what is your answer to that question. Because I understand the tension insofar as in our personnel process, we draw distinctions between research, teaching, service. We do all those kinds of things that we then organize reviews around. So I really would like to hear what's your answer. It's a great question. I'm sure you have a great answer.
Well, I mean, I think for the festival itself, part of the evaluation of success is bringing people in and having them return. And so again, that's not just quotes, butts and seats, as we say in the classroom, or selling tickets, as we say at the box office, but having people come back year after year and come back and want to stretch their understandings of the plays, wanting to see more challenging plays, wanting to participate in education, wanting to bring things back to their classrooms if they're teachers. So, I mean, from the festival point of view, it is the relationships that are the theater, and that are the miracle of the host is that the guest wants to be there, is not captive, doesn't leave at intermission, comes back and brings their friends. And, to a certain extent, that's quantifiable because we sell out. Not sell out our souls, but sell out.
Sell out in a good way.
Sell out the theater.
Thanks.
Keramet, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I love this question in part because I think the moments when the university and the prison have value conflicts are some of the most powerful and transformative moments in the work that I've seen. And I'll give an example from each side that I think really exemplify this. So on the one, and I often joke that I'm like beating my head against two state bureaucracies day in and day out, right? So like if you think the UC is a bureaucracy, imagine that even more in the state prison system. But one thing that I encountered particularly early on in Lifted was just we have incredibly overworked faculty and staff across this university. And I come to people and I say, I have these 25 students who don't have internet and they need our services. So like, can you make me a PDF of the document? Can you drive down to the prison to see them? And sometimes reasonably, the first response is like, these students are a total resource suck. Why would I do that? And it's this real moment of reorientation to say, would you say that to me about a student in a wheelchair? Would you say that to me about a veteran who had dealt with prior histories of trauma? Would you say that to me about a former foster youth? All folks that I think our campus does a phenomenal job of serving. And so it becomes this moment to say, these are students who face a different set of challenges. And part of why we're building this program at this campus is because we're a campus that has established that we do an incredible job figuring out how to serve diverse students and meet them where they are. And we can't just write them off because there's ways in which they're hard to serve. And then I often add, and there's also ways in which they're not that expensive to our campus, right? They don't need any space. They don't need any healthcare. They're not taking up housing. So there's a lot of services that our tuition covers that these students don't need. So it's also flipping the script. But I do think that value conflict moment, right, of like, I'm serving someone with a criminal record and really thinking about what that means and having that opportunity on the university side. On the flip side, in the prison, we had a huge argument this summer because we had our first student who had a serious visual impairment. And the prison said, we've already decided that we don't really need to accommodate that, right? There's all kinds of tools we could use, but like, he doesn't really need it to get by in prison life. And I was like, but that's not the value system here, right? The value system is that we have a partnership where we agreed that we would educate students who are within your jurisdiction. And as educators, we have an obligation to make sure that all of our students have equal access to materials. And if we have a student in our classroom who can't read the materials, then we are not meeting our obligations as educators. And there was this light bulb moment, right? Of like, oh, your standards are different than ours. But the collateral consequence of that is we now have people being treated more like students than prisoners, and it becomes this very humanizing moment. And so I really think that these value conflict moments are where the power of this programming is, if we can work with them and see, like, these institutions have different goals, right? Like, legitimately, the prison system's mandate is safety and security, and so we have to acknowledge that. Our mandate is education, so we have to live that. But it is, I think, really important, and it's particularly in public institutions where we can kind of, I can say to the state prison system, yeah, I have a bureaucracy too, I have a hierarchy too, but let's figure out together how to meet our obligations. And they do become these powerful moments, I think.
Yeah, I'll just chime in there. I really think for me, it's less a question of values, because my experience at UCI, well, starting with like Richard, you hiring me when we first got here, because this is the kind of work I said I wanted to do, and y'all open those doors to do it, right? And we have long-standing institutions at UCI, like our Center for Education Partnerships, that's been doing community work not for years but decades. And so I really do feel like from since I've been here, UCI has been really clear on signaling this goal and value around community engagement and community impact. And I feel like that is a real thing. Where the tensions arise for me have been in the ways that our systems are set up sometimes for new things can be pretty challenging. So like in that example I shared, we had money from NSF to build these community installations, and the city agreed to receive them as donations and to own them and to maintain them. And so we had like organized a whole agreement with the city's lawyers and the NSF and all that. It took a lot of juggling. But then when the university became part of it, they decided that this had to go through the university's construction, group. And that group was not designed or built to be building things in Santa Ana, right? It was designed to be building things on campus. And even though they weren't going to be building these things, we got an outside vendor to do that. Their process conflicted with what we were doing, because that's not what it was designed for. And so those calls, those hours and hours and hours on calls with the lawyers from the city and from the university and from with the program manager, and those delayed the project like almost 2 years. So like these are untracked, uncounted hours, and definitely thinking about like our review and tenure promotion system for faculty. And I was again, I got to the other side of this. I'm an associate professor, so I can't say anything too bad, right? Because this work happened in that context, but certainly there was hundreds of hours of unseen and unacknowledged labor that went into trying to do something innovative like this. And so I think like it starts with the values, but then I hope, which is what you kind of mentioned in the beginning, that you can then create pathways and mechanisms to be able to, for folks to be able to innovate and realize those values. And so I feel like that's a next step for growth for us
Can
as
I
an
follow
institution.
up on the question, because I hear something that runs across the three responses. So Julia, you were talking about, explaining why you're in the Office of Research. Keramet, you're talking about people that you've served for decades being referred to as resource sucks. And Andres, you're talking about procurement regulation. I mean, okay, I've heard this all. As you were talking, and confession, when Richard and I, as sociologists, talk about values, we have a particular meaning that reflects our training as sociologists. They're kind of group shared things. But I typed in the word value on Google, and it says, the regard that something is held to deserve. Keramet, resource suck. Julia, is it research? The importance, worth, or usefulness of something. AP. So if we take this very remedial definition of a value, it's the first one that comes up when you Google. I want to go back to the question Richard asked about the conflict between the institutional environment in which we exist and we do our daily work, which is the University of California, and the communities with whom we engage, not to mention the public writ large, and that collision because of how I just defined a value.
I was going to jump in on this because I also think it brings up an earlier tension in this project, this task force, the Year of Scholarly Values. There was initial discussion about tying it to virtues, which Duncan Pritchard's work on promoting intellectual virtues has been kind of an anchor in an initiative here at the university. And I think in some of this virtues tradition, the benefits of some of these virtues are not these instrumental outcomes of how many how many individuals get a degree and stay out of jail, and the improvement of math scores in Santa Ana or so on. All these are great outcomes, but the virtues are a set of behaviors that are seen to have value, are worth embracing on their own terms. And so I think, I don't know, there's something about thinking about, like, again, all the panelists talked about the importance of relationships, that there's this piece around behaviors, virtues, dispositions that isn't simply equivalent to the university's rationalization attempt to put metrics on output metrics on all these things. And I'm going to ask panelists for reflections on that. But while I do also encourage people to enter in questions, comments in the Q&A tab at the bottom of their screens, I'm going to Val and I will start to surface some of those to the panel shortly. We apologize for the lack of hospitality, that we can't see your faces fully. Julia and others, I'm sure would have wanted that, but nevertheless, we would love your comments in the Q&A stream.
I can say a few things about virtues versus values, because I do see virtues as one of these historical resources that the humanities, philosophy, the arts have a role in conserving and renewing and sharing. And I think the virtues are exactly as you said. They have to do with capacities, energies, actualization, connection, that is not necessarily quantifiable in the way that value has, to me, an intrinsically quantifiable dimension to it, as well as being potentially instrumental, as you said, Richard. So I've been very excited to work with Duncan Pritchard on the Anteater Virtues Project, and my research is on virtues in Shakespeare. And I think it's, people aren't necessarily comfortable in the university talking about virtues because it can sound moralistic or religious or prescriptive. But I think if we look at the ancient Greeks, the virtues are sites of interpersonal and social creativity, and they're intrinsically energetic and dynamic. And so and as is theater. So for me, all theater has a virtuous dimension because it's about actualizing what is potential in texts, in persons, in spaces, in relationships. So those are my thoughts about that.
So in a sense, it might be a paradox that as the public is increasingly concerned that the university doesn't deliver value, that the return on investment doesn't equal the debts that students take on, rather than simply address those concerns head on with better metrics and better outcomes, that there's this other important move to make, which is to discuss this other part that's not about return on investment, but is about this longer tradition of cultivating virtue and demonstrating virtue to the larger society.
And there could be, as I said, icebreakers. Like if you want to start talking to people who are not in the university about what we do and why we do it, I think virtues might be an interesting place to start because it can resonate with people in ways that are surprising.
I was going to pull from the Q&A. So first of all, Julie April has made 2 comments. I'm going to summarize them. She worked with Native American Indian tribes and had found that being human and building those relationships and giving back to those tribes was an essential part of success for doing that work. And she also notes that unseen and unacknowledged labor is what will bring most projects to fruition. And I know the 3 of you have done unseen and unacknowledged labor. I'm not seeing it maybe here. I've seen some of it, but I'm acknowledging it here. We know how much labor you've put in to create these incredible projects and resources for the universities. And then I'm going to pivot to the task force lead, Duncan Pritchard's question, which is, what should universities be doing to encourage excellent community engagement projects like the ones featured on this panel. So we know that there's unseen, unacknowledged labor. We know some of these are about relationships, and there's tension sometimes with traditional university valuing and metrics. How can we what would you say to the university to encourage greater investment in, and to colleagues about greater investment in these sorts of projects?
Actually, Richard, before we jump to Duncan's question, I just want to highlight something that I think is really powerful about Julie's comment, because a lot of times we think about the work and the relationship building and the time and the effort that it takes. But what I see in her comment is the value that in her words, she's reaped great rewards. Like this work is worthwhile because it opens doors and opportunities that just do not exist if you don't have that relational trust. And so you're able to create impact. And so people who are not don't have experience will see that and be like, ooh, you shouldn't do that as a junior faculty or an early career scholar, because you really need to be productive in other ways, and your institution doesn't value that. But actually there is unique and great impact in spending that time and building that relational capital, and allows you to create impact and scholarly impact that I think is unique and distinct. And so just want to totally agree with Julie that it is the work, but it's unique in the opportunities that it opens.
Can I, before we go to the comments that Richard read, forgive me, I am one of those quantifiable sociology types. I just wrote a little 2x2 table, and on one axis is virtuous, yes or no, as you described it, Julia. And on the other, the columns are, do we value them, yes or no? So as you can imagine, there's 4 cells. Now, maybe in an ideal world, we would want virtue valued, right? And when we ask an institution of the size of the University of California, this massive sprawling institution that so depends upon public goodwill, trust, not to mention funding, I can't help but think the public might have something to say about my 2x2 table.
And particularly at a moment, it's particularly salient at a moment where resources are growing. We're facing scarcity.
Yeah. And an administration that has something to say about what is virtuous and valuable. Julia, I'm really captured by you saying, as our in-house humanist, can we get back to virtue? Because it sounds like a more intrinsic thing for you. And then I, as my kind of ever pragmatic self, thinks, well, we also have the pragmatics and the realities of the environment in which we live. And while, Andres, I'm so pleased funding turned out not to be as crucial for you as you had thought, I think that's really great what you said. I know it is for some people when labs get shut down, when hires don't happen. So I wonder, can we have our cake and eat it too? Can we be virtuous and have a set of values that we publicly display and to which we commit, and that the public actually appreciates? And again, I would say, who is the we here? Who is the we here? Because I know there's different we's. Anyway, I just throwing that out because that's the conflict, Richard, I thought you were kind of trying to get at.
Well, just adding a little bit, and then the moderators will have to stop talking to each other. I would say the biggest challenge facing the university right now is declining public support, setting aside the current administration in Washington. It's the larger, broader, and erosion of public support, and it comes in. There's 2 buckets, if you will. One is the values bucket, which is often from liberal left democratic sources saying there's questions about the return on investment. There's questions on cost and efficiency and output. And we're losing trust in the sector because of this question about more of a value question, not a values, a value question. And then in more conservative camps, there's where public support has declined much more dramatically. I think it's much more about kind of cultural concerns about what we're doing, our dispositions, our ways of engaging students, and what the curriculum is. Questions that are not just virtues, but touch on virtues more. So I think that's just another way to think about it, that there's if we're serious about facing this moment where higher ed is being challenged and we need to right the ship according to the new president, I think we're going to have to do work on both the value side and the virtue side.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And I think, like, listening to you, Richard and Julia, I think some of the problem is how much we separate them often, right? Like, I think particularly in like values work, there's an idea that the virtues are somehow undermining it or biasing it. And I think, or the virtues are seen negatively, right? Like I think your like values somehow got put on one side of the political spectrum and virtues on the other. And in some ways, I think combining them is so powerful. And that's, I mean, that's part of, like, that's literally what I was doing when I was talking about the prison, right? I was like giving you stats and I was giving you specific stories about moments. And I think, like, I just, in my own work, I think of so many examples of that where like there's great values oriented, quantifiable, measurable, like here's a policy we want, and it doesn't resonate in the same way a moment where you're thinking about how are we engaging as humans and does it feel right? Right? And I think that's some of the power, actually, I think it's some of why people like the prison work so much is because they have those, like faculty and students get to have those moments together in these, like to speak to Andres's point, also in Julia Abril's, like where you're showing up in the same physical community space again and again, where there aren't often, where people haven't shown up enough before. And then so I feel like those two things actually weave together very nicely, that partly if you show up again and if you take the time to show up again and again in these spaces, maybe there's room to do more of that work to integrate values and virtues where we've let them become too divided.
And that virtues are a place where maybe left and right can find some common ground. Like that's why I was talking about them as icebreakers. Like, well, what do you mean by courage? What do you mean by charity? What do you mean by benevolence, by empathy? Or for me, hospitality, care, and trust. Like what do these things mean to you? And so I think it's really important that we not, we, in this case, I'm using the we as the liberal we, my apologies. But Val asked us to think about the we, that we liberals don't throw out our most valuable resources, which include the virtues, and that we try to find areas in the culture where we might be able to determine some shared vocabulary and some shared commitments in order to rebuild the trust that's been broken down. And so that would be one answer I'd have to that, sort of virtues moving towards the right and values to the left. Let's not let that happen. That we need to find forms of research and teaching and service that integrate research, teaching, and service, and that integrate values and virtues in a way that is reflective and intentional. Again, I think that Anteater Virtues Project, which emphasizes the intellectual virtues, integrity, curiosity, resilience, and intellectual humility, these are the skills, capacities, strengths, orientations that students and faculty and staff need in order to succeed in creating value for the university. So without integrity, we can't do research, right? Without humility, we can't do research. And so I think that's also bringing it back to those intellectual virtues is good, although I want to make sure that the moral virtues or practical virtues also have a place. But I really think we need to be integrating these things so that we can actually talk to people who aren't us, which is very challenging. But we do have tools.
And I'll circle back to Duncan's question, and to say, like, well, I do not mean at all to say that those grant cuts didn't hurt us deeply and disrupt plans and lives, and it is obviously very serious stuff. But what my hope and my sentiment is that that's ultimately not what sustains us and drives us. But I think, like, this particular moment goes back to that question of what universities can do. And I think Ocean as an initiative from the beginning is an example of having a virtue or a value that you want to uphold, this idea of partnership and community engagement, and then putting real actual resources behind it. So Richard could probably speak to this better than I can about what those institutional moves were like in the beginning, but it involved recruiting faculty with expertise in this, supporting a cohort of doctoral students. And I know there was local philanthropy that had to be engaged to create this. And there's an incentive structure for our faculty leadership to be able to engage and free up the time to do this work. And so those are all actual dollars, fiscal resources. And so creating infrastructure, I think, to support this kind of work is more important now than ever, where we're like losing our biggest funding source to support this kind of work. And indeed, if you're going to show up in the communities that we want to work in, they do have resources and social capital and dollars, but like part of it is like us bringing stuff to the table, right? That was definitely part of this history of collaboration that we're doing, like the university is contributing, and so universities need these systematic structures to support this kind of work, and I think now more than ever.
As some of what I've seen in Lifted is that sometimes it's hard to convince, like, structurally, bureaucratically, people to invest. Like, like a faculty member wants to teach in Lifted in a department is like, why, like, I'm not serving my students. And it's sort of a funny, like, this to me is like a really important nut to crack, is like kind of figuring out how to cultivate. And I don't think it has to be financial, but figuring out how to cultivate this space in the university that we have a shared mission, right? Like, I genuinely feel in Lifted like I share a mission with engineering and computer science and biology and humanities to bring knowledge to a broader group of students and to build this program. And the idea that we're sort of parsing, like, who's getting credit for which students, and that there's not quite an infrastructure, right? Like, we're housed in the Division of Undergraduate Education, and I talk a lot with the folks in that division, like in honors, and like, how do we create a mentality where, like, serving a program that's serving everyone in the university, or that's serving the mission more broadly, as opposed to one that serves social sciences or biology or education, like creating a little more space for that in the university. And I think there could be creative ways to do that, right? That don't necessarily mean huge financial investments at a time of constraint, but just, like an expectation that every school contributes some piece to a shared project, or, however you structure it, in the ways we kind of changing the ways people conceptualize their work a little bit.
And that was part of the intention of this initiative, right? That scholarly values are across the campus, and the committee represents different parts of the campus. And I think that's one of the things that's been very exciting, being part of this year of reflection. But there's not enough of that at UCI. We're just not set up that way.
Yeah. And there's not enough of it. And there's also a question Duncan asks, are we doing enough to show people outside of the academy how we contribute to the public good, such as via these community projects? Is that a viable path to restoring more faith in what we do? And I'll also add to that, during the Trump administration's attacks on Harvard, one of the responses was through the PR firm's advice, changing the website of Harvard and some of the other AAU universities to emphasize the scientific discoveries that Harvard had generated and the health services they were providing the community. And I thought that was good, except the critique on higher education isn't about that. It's about how we're serving our students. What and um, and again, some of these other types of community engagement projects, which is in the delivery of health at a university hospitals, which is great. And if I'm ever facing an illness, I would like to, afford myself of those incredible resources. But what about why aren't we surfacing and amplifying this sort of work in this moment where we're under attack? Would that be useful?
Richard, can I add and tie your question to something Julia said? And I think it's going back to virtues. Years ago, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, I saw a presentation and it was public polling data on what the public thought of higher education at all three levels. And if you imagine a map of California, color coded, where's it doing? Anyway, UC Davis popped. Everybody in the room was like, what's up at Davis? I mean, how do they win? Is it the wine? Wasn't the wine, we were told. They have a vet school. And you save Fluffy, you will be loved for life. Or you save a farmer's herd, and that's make or break for a whole enterprise. It was a very profound moment for me because then it all made sense, because really Davis popped. And I wonder, can we tie those pragmatic demonstrations of value, and I would say virtue, right? Serving the public interest, in my view, is a value and a virtue. But as we move up the liberal arts mission goals to create the educated, critical thinking, let there be light, illuminated, wonderfully informed citizen, it gets a little harder to demonstrate, doesn't it? Because it's one thing to say Fluffy. It's another thing to say, trust me, democracy will be better off. I don't know. Julia, I'm trying to tie what you were saying about the intrinsic value with kind of what I think some of the public's interested in is real instrumental value. And I don't like the word return on investment, but it sure is everywhere. I don't know, just throwing that out because I thought we need a vet school. I left that meeting going, we need a vet school immediately.
Well, there's something in the Q&A from Duncan about AI, and that if all we're doing is creating skills, AI will do that for us. So we have to be cultivating something else. We have to be cultivating judgment, creativity, vision, perspective. I'm trying not to say critical thinking very hard, but
yeah,
there's other things that we have to be cultivating, because otherwise we are just planning our own obsolescence. And so those other things strike me on the virtue side, but they are what will be valuable in a society where lots of other tasks can be taken care of through AI.
Yeah, I was going to say it's worse than that even, Julia, because it's not only if we're just cultivating skills are going to be replaced by the AI. There's also a belief in some circles that the AI will also be able to generate research in a way better and more efficiently and cheaper than the research universities. And so if the output is just research output and skills for students, again, as Duncan says in the note, we're toast. And so I think this this embracing this long tradition and language that has served universities so well for centuries. Again, as Julie says, abandoning that resource at this moment would be, not wise. But that, again, sorry, that was more comment than
No, I love
question.
that.
I'm a terrible moderator, it turns
No,
out.
you're not. You're wonderful.
Well, I want to ask Keramet, because since I've had some proximity to Lifted, Keramet, the number of documents where we cite a RAND report that is a return on investment statistic. For every dollar invested, you would get da. And then one of the most profound moments I had in my engagement with Lifted was, I can't remember where we were, Pitzer maybe. And everybody was talking about how to launch their programs and what to do and all the reasons. And a formerly incarcerated woman stood up and she, towards the end, after hours of listening, said, "Stop." Because we were bullet pointing all of our selling points. And she said, "How about just because it's human beings?" Do you remember that, Keramet? And I mean, you could have dropped the mic. I was a little ashamed, actually. But we had been in proposal writing mode where you have to articulate some other things. And it, to me, Richard, it was that collision course that I think you initiated this kind of discussion around. It was memorable, and for me, it was a source of shame that we had sat there for hours in front of a formerly incarcerated person, putting up on a whiteboard the value of education without just saying full speed, full throttle, human beings and their lives matter.
But I think
You remember that,
speaks,
Keramet?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Whoa.
But I think this speaks so eloquently to the values virtues dichotomy and how harmful it is, right? I mean, it's an example of like extreme valuation with extreme distance from virtues. And I don't think that going all the way to virtues without values, right? It's a question of integrating these things, right? And I think really carefully when I talk about this of saying like there are multiple audiences here. And like I did when I started, right? Like there are individual benefits, right? Like our students do really well. They get honors. They're not gonna, I notice I really hesitate to say, and they're not gonna recidivate as often, right? Like they're way less likely to commit crimes because I think we're educators and that shouldn't be what we lead with. And it's a similar, right? But nonetheless, that's really important, right? Like that's a really important value. We save a lot of money if people don't go back to prison. It costs I think it's up to $115,000 per person per year to keep someone in prison in California. Imagine how many students we could educate for that cost, right? Like that is an incredibly important value proposition, right? Like literally where we're putting our money. But it's meaningless if we don't bridge it with the virtues of why we should care about these human beings who we think maybe do or don't deserve this education. So I guess I see, I don't know, Val, yes, those are uncomfortable moments. They're uncomfortable because they're representing exactly what we're talking about of not integrating these things together. And I think sometimes there's a fear of like, if I tell you how human these students are, A, like I'm going to generate a really divisive political conversation and B, I'm gonna undermine the validity of my claim about good students or cost savings. And I think it's really important to figure out how to get beyond that, right? And really, I often do it with stories about specific students, right? Like our first student who was released, who was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole at 16 for being the lookout at a murder, right? Like, and hadn't had a disciplinary violation in prison in decades. Like, let's talk about the specific cases, right? Like, let's make this much more real in a very personal way, so that we can stop thinking about the numbers, or we can think about the numbers with color, right?
That's beautiful.
Maybe we should, Richard, or do we close at 4?
I think we are closing at 4, and we're going to have to share, Val, since we in the thanking of our panelists and audience. So I'm very grateful for this conversation. I've, as always, learned a lot from three of my favorite colleagues, and this idea of integrating values and virtues as, uh, in an important way forward, I'm really grateful for. Val?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, this is fascinating, and my measure of that is I've taken lots of notes, and I'll be thinking about it and go into my ruminating self. And Keramet, you talked earlier about how you draw inspiration from the work of others, and I find this very inspiring and inspired. And I say to people all the time, I'm happiest when I'm learning. And so I want to thank all of you for teaching me. I mean, this is how it happens. And this is kind of, Andres, the way you talked about it, the community part of it, the engagement. So really on a personal level, I want to thank you all. And, on behalf of the university, and I want to speak more as Senate chair now, is the Senate has co-sponsored this series. These are the kinds of conversations I hope more and more faculty can engage in, because our individual and collective fate, I think, really does depend on it. I didn't see the word toast in the in the commentary, but it's a word I would use. I mean, the stakes are very, very high, and I think we have a very honorable mission. I just Googled it at UC's webpage. It's right there, front and center. We do have a mission, and I think it's an honorable mission. And we have to have lots of conversations about how to fulfill it and to protect it. So I'm inspired by the work you all do. And I know there's other programs on this campus. And now I think we should all think about values and virtues. And I'm going to have to complicate my 2x2 box here pretty quickly. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It's
Thanks
been a
for
great
creating
year.
the space. It was
And-
great to talk to
And
all of you.
thanks to the audience for listening in and joining with the comments.